So the last time we were together, we did our little ethical oral case study, and we talked about some decisions we were going to make with regards to whether we buy unethical material or not. We left with this particular slide, the stakeholders of conscientious marketing. And the last thing I left you with is I kind of went over the premise of the slide, but over the next few slides now, we're going to get deeper into it. And each one of these stakeholders in their family, each one of these employees in their family, customers, potential customers, partners, competitors, community, environment, all of these are stakeholders of conscientious marketing or ethical and social responsibility marketing. So we start with employees. The basic responsibility for employees is to make sure that we have a working, safe environment, which is free of threats, physical safety, health, or well-being, also free of hostile work environments such as bullying or sexual harassment or something like that. So our first responsibility for being ethical is being ethical and socially responsible towards our own employees. That's going to help you retain employees better. By retaining employees, we're going to have a higher net income because we're not going to have to replace them. We're going to have lower hiring costs. We're going to have lower training costs, et cetera, et cetera. So our number one ethical responsibility really is to our employees. Then we have an ethical responsibility to our customers. Our customers want to buy from organizations that are ethically responsible and socially responsible both. When they do buy from an ethically and socially responsible corporation or company, they feel better about themselves. Many customers would not want to or do not buy from somebody who is unethical because if they're buying from a dirty company or they're buying from an unethical company, they feel like the unethical business is going to rub off on them. So it really starts with the whole value chain, the customers, the suppliers, etc. Conscientious marketing focuses on increasing awareness, making sure we're building an ethical community, building a socially responsible community, and eventually it's going to increase sales. The other quadrant of the ethical and social responsibility is the marketplace. Within the marketplace, if one firm acts unethically, it can hurt the entire marketplace. A lot of people think of different industries as being unethical. We talked about the advertising industry as being unethical. So it just really takes one company within that industry to be unethical, and then the whole industry is looked upon as unethical. It happened with WorldCom and telecommunications when they acted unethically. There was a dark cloud that was over all of the other telecommunications companies. So one firm in the industry can either lead the way towards conscientious marketing or unethical marketing. And when one suffers, the entire industry suffers. So partners, competitors, etc. have no choice really but to act ethically or get a black mark for their entire industry. And then finally, personal ethics influence the way the company is directed. Genetics, family, religion, values, all of those things influence ethics in a way. The way someone is brought up, the way somebody has been governed themselves, the way somebody has acted in the past will affect the way they act in the future. It's said that if someone acts unethically and gets away with it, they're apt to act unethically again. What we want to do is we want to try to stop that unethical behavior before it really starts. In the last case study I gave you, one of the reasons why we didn't buy that unethical product is because we were afraid that it was going to spiral into every year having to continue to make that profit margin by buying unethically. So if we don't dip our toe into the water of unethical behavior or unsocially responsible behavior, then it isn't apt to happen in the future. Why do people act unethically? I can tell you, firms act unethically, generally speaking, because they want a higher profit. firms or companies act unethically because they're trying to have a higher profit for their stockholders, a higher profit for their managers, etc. Managers act unethically because it's a higher payday for them. So the more or the higher the payday, the higher the profit margin, etc., the more somebody is actually not forced to, but would be apt to act unethically. So people take a lot of risk when the reward is high. If the reward is low, and we talked about this when we were together on Wednesday, if the reward is low, people will, generally speaking, act socially responsible or ethically. But when you're talking about huge amounts of profit, huge amounts of money for managers, etc., then the areas become grayer. There's no black and white. It becomes grayer. So basically, firms are motivated by profit. The number one thing for any business is to make a profit. And managers are motivated oftentimes by their salary and their gain, either through profit or their increase in salary, etc., or through promotion, etc. So sometimes people will engage in unethical behavior or questionable behavior, and they're not unethical people. It's just the reward is so high, or the pressure to make a profit is so high. So the other thing is decisions often have conflicting outcomes. A good example was the case study that we worked on Wednesday. There were both positives and negatives to the decisions that we made on Wednesday. And there's no clear cut and dried answer that says you should do this or you shouldn't do this. But as I said before, just about everybody knows right from wrong. And if they let their post-conventional morality guide them, or making decisions not based on what's legal or what's illegal, and not making decisions based on what people will think about it, but making decisions based on what's right and what's wrong, oftentimes those gray areas become much more clear and it becomes much more black and white. However, again, in many, many instances when managers make decisions, there is no right or wrong. There is no cut and dried answer, but there's always right from wrong. And if we let our post-conventional morality guide us, then we, generally speaking, will do the right thing. So really, it's a quadrant. And the quadrant talks about ethical responsibility and unethical decision-making, ethical decision-making and unethical decision-making. And then an organization being socially responsible and an organization being socially irresponsible. Organizations can be both socially responsible and ethical, which is in the top left quadrant. That means they're making ethical decisions, they're doing the right thing, and they're also being sustainable with regards to environment, labor practices, who they buy from, coercion practices, etc. Or they can make ethical decisions and also be socially irresponsible with they can make ethical decisions but not care about the environment or the community in which they live in, etc. Or they can be socially responsible, care about the environment, care about labor relations, etc., and make questionable decisions or have questionable practices within their firm. And then finally, the worst quadrant, of course, is being neither ethical nor socially responsible. We'd like to think that we as managers, and as you become managers, we like to think that you become both ethically, socially responsible and make ethical decisions. And you live in that top, upper, left-hand quadrant where you're socially responsible as well as ethical. So the book or the text comes out and talks about a framework for ethical decision making. And step 1 through step 2 through step 3 and 4. We're going to go over each one of these steps. Step 1, of course, being identify the issues. Are we misleading or harming the public? Are we hiding the real purpose of, a study? Are we cooking the books? Are we having unethical accounting practices? Are we buying from unethical suppliers? Are we buying from people who are not socially responsible? Are we collecting data from human subjects or something like that unethically? So the first thing we got to do is identify what are some of the issues that are facing us, or what are some of the issues that the firm is faced with that can be either ethical or not ethical, or responsible or not responsible. The second thing we've got to do is gather information. We've got to talk to the community. We've got to talk to the people. We've got to talk to experts. We've got to identify all ethical issues and relevant legal information. We've got to take a look and identify information on our suppliers, on their practices, on how they're being ethical, etc. You got to identify all relevant stakeholders and whether they're being ethical, whether the customers that we're supplying to are doing ethical practices. It's in the entire value chain. So step 2 is really to gather information on stakeholders, identify the stakeholders, and identify all the information that relates to the issues. Then finally, step 3 is we got to brainstorm and evaluate alternatives. What should we do? What happens if we do this? What's the upside? What's the downside? Should we halt the market research project? Should we come clean with our stakeholders? Should we go to the press with what we've done or what we're trying to do? We need to go back to our code of conduct. We need to do all those types of things, brainstorm alternatives, and then finally, once we brainstorm and evaluate the alternatives, we need to choose a course of action that is ethical, and then we need to make sure that we're controlling that and we're making sure that we're communicating that course of action throughout the entire organization, throughout all the employees, so that they understand it. We're weighing the alternatives. We're saying if there's downside, if there's upside, what's the right decision? Why is it the right decision? Then we're taking a course of action and making sure once we take that course of action, we're making sure that we are communicating that course of action not only to our internal employees, but our external stakeholders, etc. And sometimes that course of action could be difficult. We might have to stop doing business with one of our better customers because we don't like their decision-making or their ethical practices or their sustainability practice. We might have to stop buying from one of our suppliers and buy from a higher supplier or somebody who's more expensive because we don't like their ethical practices, etc., etc. This is a good place to stop. And part 2 will be coming up in just a second.